أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم برضوان إلى يوم الدين. Today is 17th session, and we are going to cover Surah Al-Kahf today. It's difficult to cover this surah because it has so much that it contains, and it's very hard to summarize it in just a matter of 25 to 30 minutes. But I'll try to offer a perspective on this surah in terms of how it is essential for dealing with the modern world in which we find ourselves. What is strange about this surah, I find it's not strange but at least interesting about this surah, is that most of the evidence points to the fact that this is a Meccan surah that was revealed in Mecca and again revealed towards the later part of the Mecca, towards the end of it, time of that Prophet ﷺ had there. And while the surah is linked with the Meccan surah, linked with Meccan time, an earlier time in the Prophet's life, based on some narrations and some hadiths, it is linked with the end of times. And you see people discussing end of times in Islamic terms usually bring out this surah because of some hadiths which are not very strong, but they are there, which say that whoever recites Al-Kahf every Friday will be saved from the fitna of Dajjal, or whoever recites the first 10 verses will be saved from the fitna of Dajjal. Whoever recites the last 10 verses will be saved from the fitna of Dajjal. So all those narrations we find in the Sunnah, and because of that, this hadith, this surah has taken a significance in which there is a culture and tradition globally for Muslims to recite Al-Kahf on Fridays. But the thing we need to understand about reciting a surah to alleviate a fitna or a problem is that Quran is not the kind of document that contains some magical words, and that if you repeat those words from your tongue, then you are saved. We should not consider any part of the Quran as being that to be the purpose of it. In the past cultures and societies, people used to do those things. They used to hang amulets on their necks with certain words written on it, and they still do to this day to some extent, and think that they are going to be saved from it. But the idea when Quran presents something as an answer to some issue or a problem, then it means that it contains the guidance to deal with that issue or problem, and not just some magical words. And so we need to see how we can draw from the Quran the guidance to deal with the modern world. Now, strangely, Bible contains a book of Revelation which is all about the end of the world and apocalypse and the whole narration in it, and even some biblical scholars do debate whether the incidents in the book of Revelation belong to the end of the world or have already happened in the past. And on a parallel level, we find Muslims who find ahadith about the Dajjal, about the signs of the Qiyamah, and then they try to connect that with the Quran. But the Quran does not contain any book of revelation of that kind. It has no chapter devoted to the end of times or how the world will be at the end of times, nothing like that. Quran deals with the human psychology based on all the possible circumstances that human beings may face. And it gives guidance, it tries to counsel men how to deal with those situations and circumstances. And so that is also how we should take this. Having said that, I also feel that some of those narrations about the end of the world and Qiyamah and the signs of Qiyamah are given more importance than they deserve in some ways. Prophet ﷺ spent 23 years of his life as messenger. He kept receiving revelation after revelation throughout those times. He used to stand and speak to people throughout those times. And by most accounts, those narrations are not from any more than 1 or 2 days of his life. Actually, some people say that all the narrations that deal with Qiyamah and Day of Judgment are derived from 1 day of Prophet's life. That on that day he stood on the minbar and he started warning people that what the world will become. And then prayer time will come and he will step down and then go back again and continue. And what we have preserved from that is just small fragments of it. In the signs of Qiyamah, the hadiths that exist are only fragments from that time. And so we don't find any such thing in Surah Al-Kahf. I mean, we don't see any end of times, any Qiyamah, any of those indications. In fact, even to discuss the Day of Judgment, there are other surahs that devote themselves. So there's Surah Qiyamah, and then a lot of surahs towards the end of the Quran deal with the man and his appearance before Allah on the Day of Judgment. But when Quran deals with the Day of Judgment, it deals with the Day of Judgment purely from the perspective of human accountability and its imminence, that it can come any time and that then you will lose your time to act, and so you should prepare for it. And that's the perspective that Quran carries throughout regarding the Day of Judgment. And it doesn't give any prophecies regarding it, or it doesn't give any prophecies as to what will happen before that time. Prophecies are something that have existed throughout all traditions. Christians, Jews, everyone has contained that. And usually these prophecies take more prominence in times of fitna, in times where you feel helpless, in times when you feel that the world you live you are unable to control. Then you start to rely on, well, things are out of our hands, so we need to rely on these. So we should not attach so much to it. As I said, we don't have a chapters in Quran devoted to the end of times like in other traditions, and Quran doesn't deal with that at all. In the whole Quran, if it was important, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have dealt with it. But having said that, when you do read those ahadiths in which Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam indicated the time towards the end of the world, if I just want to summarize a sense of what kind of world that will be, without trying to take them literally and without trying to interpret them in a literal sense, what becomes clear is that what Prophet ﷺ was describing was a time when man will gain mastery over nature. He will be able to conquer the world in ways in which it was not done in the past. So he will be able to do things to human beings. He will have technology to be able to do things. He will understand how to harvest and the qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in the world, and as a result it will be able to use them. So what it conveys is a very materialistic world and a very materialistic interpretation of the world. And I'm not using the word materialism as opposed to wealth and enjoyment and luxury, because the word materialism is used against it, and I'm not here to propose an asceticism or zuhud in the face of materialism, and certainly that is part of this world. But the materialism I'm talking about is the philosophical materialism, where human reliance on material causes and causations and his belief in science, which is material knowledge, his belief in science will reach to a level where his belief in Allah is going to be reduced. And that is a description of our modern world, but I'm not sure that this is the time that it would apply to, because you don't know how long the world is going to last and how much progress there remains for human beings to make, and how many generations are going to come after us. And when the day of judgment will come, we do not know. Quran just says that be prepared for it. It's as close as a blink of your eye. Kalahmin bil basar. It's just as close that it can catch you. And so that is not what it deals with. So when you interpret those things in the light of this materialistic interpretation of the world, this technology that we find ourselves surrounded by, then you will understand how this verse, this surah contains guidance to deal the materialistic philosophy of the world that will be prevalent at the time of Dajjal, whatever that means, symbolically or metaphorically. It will be a material world, and so that material world, as a result of its reliance on a materialistic interpretation of the world, will become denier of God. Denier of God, not in the sense that you will refuse to accept that God exists as a matter of cultural or identity of faith, or even as a reality, but that God will have no business in the interpretation of the world and how the world functions, how the world runs, how you organize your life in the world. God will have no say in that. So the symbolism of kafara being written on the forehead of those times is indicated by this godlessness that we find ourselves surrounded by. And if we understand that aspect of the times that Prophet ﷺ was describing, then I think you will find that this surah is very relevant for these times. It's very relevant because it deals with that kind of materialistic interpretation of the world and how to deal with that world. And it essentially contains about 5 stories in the whole surah. The story of Kahf, and the story of the 2 gardens, and the story of Adam alayhi salam, the story of Musa alayhi salam and his journey, and the story of Zulqarnain. And so these are the few stories that are contained. But I think I'm not sure if I will be able to cover all of them, but I think I would like to give you some indication that you can go in the future to study yourself and reflect on other stories in the same light as these. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes is the story of the people of Kahf. And the story of people of Kahf, the most important statement that it makes to me is this statement in which they say, Innahum in yadharu alaykum yarjumukum aw yu'idukum fi millatihim walan tuflihu idhan abada. That they are out to overpower you, and if they are able to gain control over you, then they are either going to yarjumukum, wipe you out, annihilate you, destroy you, or yu'idukum fi millatihim, or they will absorb you and assimilate you in their own system and culture. And modern civilization, the modern world, contains that kind of environment where you have to conform, you have to do many things based on its own systems and circumstances and science and technology and everything else that it contains. And so you are afraid, and we are afraid about our children, that the culture is going to absorb them, and that they will not be able to be saved. And so these are some youth, some young people who found themselves with that problem, with that fitna, surrounded by that fitna. And when they were surrounded by that fitna, they wanted to find a way out of that fitna. And they couldn't. So in order to seek a way out and to reflect and to discuss what they can do, they sought a refuge in a cave. Is awal fityatu ila al-kahfi faqalu rabbana atina min ladunka rahmatan wa hayyi lana min amrina rashada. And provide for us, prepare for us a way in what we are facing, so that we may be guided to it. Rashada is that kind of knowledge, that kind of guidance that enables you to see the circumstances as they are, as opposed to ghai, which means you are deluded and disillusioned and you are not unable to see what the reality is, and so you are unable to be guided to the correct situation and correct circumstance. So to be able to be guided to the correct understanding of any situation and circumstances is for that the Arabic word rushd is used. And so they were seeking that rushd from Allah, that may Allah guide them. So instead of achieving that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them a sign. Made them a sign where they were put to sleep for whatever number of hundreds of years. And when they woke up, the situations and circumstances had completely changed. The world had changed. And they found themselves in a very different world. But the idea that you need to take time out, the idea that you need to reflect and find ways in which you can fight with that environment and fight with that culture and fight with that civilization in terms of being able to maintain your belief and your faith and your rationality of your faith and your connection to the Allah in terms of whatever causation, material causation may be there. The real cause is Allah behind everything. So in order to remember and recall that, that is the lesson of the Surah Al-Kahf, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with the very first story of the beginning of that kind of culture that was out to assimilate them, that was dominating culture in denial of God. A dominating culture in denial of God is what we face today. Our academia, our theories, our instructions, everything is based on denial of God. Universities have departments of religion. People go in study religion, and they have conferences and academies of religion being established. But they are not really studying religion. They are studying religion from a perspective of a socio-economic phenomena. So it doesn't contribute anything towards changing your faith, your understanding, your belief in Allah. And so this is not the path that is going to result in you understanding the guidance better by going through modern universities and studying religion there, because their perspective is socio-economic. They don't want anyone who believes in it to be able to be discussing it. It has to be discussed from what they call an objective perspective. And so what I'm saying is that because of that, the whole influential part of the society is prepared and developed in denial of that God. And so the second most moving story I find is the story of the two gardens that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in this surah. Two gardens that represent a picture of an economic paradise. Not just one, but two gardens. Two gardens that are overfilling with productivity. They have perfected their efficiency of production, that they produce to its fullest extent. Whatever is possible to be obtained from it is obtained from it. Wala yadlimu min shay'a. It doesn't leave anything out. It provides everything to it. And in that environment, the people who, here is if you consider, there is a difference of opinion whether this story is a parable or it really belongs to a particular two persons in the history. But that is immaterial, because we need to draw a lesson from it. So in that lesson, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes two characters, two kinds of people who dealt with that environment. The one who thought he owns the place, and who thought that he has prepared it all by himself, and who thought that other people should not have any share from it, that those who do not have, they do not have because of their fault, and that he is the one who is responsible for this production, this talent that he used to produce, this maximum efficiency that he has achieved in terms of this economic production. We can translate that into the modern world in our own context. The economic productivity, the GNP, the per capita income, where we stand, and then the attitude we adopt regarding it, that it is our culture, our civilization that has provided that to us, our knowledge that has given it to us. We have conquered the world based on our knowledge, and it is we who are responsible for doing this. And so man takes pride on it and doesn't want to share it with anyone. And this is where the culture is. You see, our society is so much against any welfare, and they leave, if there is to be any welfare, they leave it to faith organizations, and they say the government is not responsible, society is not responsible, civic society is not responsible for someone going hungry, and all of that, and there shouldn't be any redistribution of wealth. Which I think is dealt very beautifully in Surah Qalam, and I'm sure we are going to come to it towards the end. So inshallah, I will take that aspect up from there. But the idea that people who are down for their own faults, and so those people are put down as a result. So this is the attitude the person adopted with regards to the economic productivity that he had achieved. And he had built a wall around it to protect it. And a space between the two gardens was also productive. And so rivers were flowing, fruits were being produced, and all of that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a beautiful picture of economic productivity here. And in that economic productivity, the person commits a shirk. Which is what it comments on at the end, that وَلَكِنَّهُ اللَّهُ رَبِّي وَلَا أُشْرِكُ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. That why didn't you believe in Allah, believe in His power, and said, مَا Allah la quwwata illa billah, in tarani ana aqalla minka malahu wa walada. So instead of saying that everyone else who doesn't have it, I have it, and I have it because of my own doing, my own power, why didn't you attribute it to the powers of Allah? And so it is not what is achieved, it is the materialistic thinking behind it, that whatever has happened, the causations of it is within our hands, within our means. And so it's a materialistic interpretation of the world, where you associate powers where they don't belong. And so that is the shirk. And that is the modern shirk that the society commits constantly. And that is the shirk from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to save us from. That is the shirk of the Dajjali times, that you put your trust on materialistic causes behind everything. And you think you are in control. You can control the winds, you can control the airplanes, you can fly at speeds, you can do what you want. And so is everything, there is some technology that you have harvested behind everything that you have achieved. And so it is that harvesting of technology, that understanding of the physics and chemistry and the biology behind it, that has enabled you to make all this progress. That is the shirk. That is the modern shirk. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word shirk here, it is not connected with the shirk in idols, in intercessions before Allah, in partners with Allah, but it is this modern shirk. And so you can see how this surah connects us to our times so beautifully in that sense. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises us against this modern shirk, in which the world falls into constantly because of this modern civilization that we face. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an example. It makes an example out of it. That one night, despite all his mastery over his garden, a wind comes and blows everything away. Nothing is left. And that's the point where he realizes there's absolutely nothing that he could save. Not even a bit. Everything is gone. And so I sometimes would like to connect it with the times we are living in right now, with all the technological advance, all the hospitals, all the things that we have mastered. A small virus has brought the whole world onto its knees, unable to do anything, unable to fly your planes. And so this is the situation and circumstances which should connect us with Allah, with His power, with being able to say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And so if we reflect, and other stories are also on the same track, and if I have time sometime in the future, I'll be able to go through all of that. But for example, Musa's story is about not placing your things that as they appear may not be as they appear. The illusions that you see in the world, and then that also removes your trust in Allah. And then Zulqarnain, about the powers that he was given and people he met. And so all of those things are really connected with our times. If you want to interpret the stories of the signs of Qiyamah and Dajjal, then the only lesson that I draw from it is this materialistic interpretation of the world and man's mastery over the nature, and as a result it leading man to denial of Allah and the shirk. And so this is how the surah is connects us with our times, with our modern times. So even though the narrations about the tradition of reciting the surah every Friday are not as strong as many other narrations, but I think it is significant to utilize that. It is significant because when I reflect on the surah, I find a lot in the surah that connects us with the modern world, and to put our trust and power in Allah. And that lesson is also given to us through a very simple statement, a mundane statement we say every day, inshallah. But the instruction that no matter what you say, you will be able to do, or whatever you interpret about your future, nothing is outside of His realm. So you need to always say inshallah. And if you say inshallah with this conscious realization of why inshallah is being said, rather than becoming a cultural phrase that you utter like you utter so many other phrases culturally that have become part of the conversation and language, then you understand the significance of how the simple mundane statement is a protection for us against the materialistic interpretation of the world that we find ourselves surrounded by, and that is also found in this Surah Al-Kahf. So my time is up. I'm going to stop here. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.